President Muhammadu Buhari has approved the extension of phase 2 of the ease lockdown by another 4 weeks, with effect from today, Tuesday, June 30, through midnight, Monday, July 27. However, there are some modifications. Interstate travel is now allowed outside the curfew hours, and students who are taking their final examinations are allowed to resume in schools. The Presidential Task Force explained the new modifications.
Under the extended phase of the eased lockdown as approved by Mr. President. The current nationwide curfew will remain. We will maintain restrictions on mass gatherings and sporting activities. Domestic aviation services will recommence. Movement across state boundaries will be allowed, but only outside curfew hours. Students in graduating classes, only graduating classes, primary 6, JS3, and SS3 will be allowed to resume in preparation for examinations. Federal and state government offices will maintain their current timing, with only essential staff allowed at the same level of grade level 14 and above to resume work. The use of face masks remains mandatory, and we will be enforcing this at all levels, including linking up with state governments. Access to government and commercial premises will not be allowed if you are not wearing a face mask. In other words, no mask, no entry.
Right, let's go to that. It was quite shocking for a lot of us yesterday when we saw it. Interstate lockdown lifted, but like Dr. Abati, you normally say, was there any interstate lockdown in the first place? I don't think there was any interstate lockdown in the first place. It was all, and I'm sorry to say this, I may not hurt people. It was just a money-making venture for some people. I'll tell you something I heard off the record yesterday. A security agent said, this COVID period, I was planning on changing my shift to expressway because the money made there.
Oh my God.
Well, the Presidential Task Force said they presented their 5th report to President Buhari on 2 things: the level of compliance so far. And I hope that they must have made it very clear that with regard to non-pharmaceutical interventions, many Nigerians seem to still be in denial. And that's perhaps the reason why we see the numbers going up almost on a daily basis. Not necessarily because the number of laboratories have increased to 39 or because testing has been ramped up to over 135,000. The truth of the matter is that we face a very serious problem. And we haven't even experienced the second wave. We haven't even reached the peak yet, as Boss Mustafa pointed out yesterday. Now that the interstate travel outside the curfew period will now be allowed, then you see a lot of movement up and down. And I just hope that maybe we will learn from the measures that have been adopted in other places, say New York, for example, or Jacksonville, Florida, where the use of masks is made compulsory. Within the first week of the announcement that masks will be compulsory, yes, I saw quite a number of people trying to wear masks. But if you go to the markets now, most of the markets or by the roadside in Lagos, nobody is using any mask again. In fact, they've turned it into a chin guard. So in terms of engaging the people, I don't think we're doing enough. Secondly, the point was made yesterday that 18 local governments account for 60% of the COVID-19 cases in Nigeria, and that government is considering locking down those 18 local governments. Well, I don't know how within a space of 3 weeks, they've now gone from 20 local governments to 18 local governments. Because in the first week of June, what we were told was that 20 local governments account for 60%. So what has happened? Has there been a reduction in 2 of the local governments? And if you look at it, most of the local governments are in Lagos, with Lagos mainland leading, Etiosa, Kusofe, Amuwo Odofin, Ikeja, and then Kano, Katsina, almost in that order. So if those local governments are going to be locked down, we may face a situation whereby almost half of Lagos will be on the street lockdown.
But if that's what it takes, then I support it. But I want to talk about the schools and the measures that have been taken with regards to the schools. So I like that some kind of flexibility has been demonstrated here, that schools cannot be closed ad infinitum, but you can also balance that with the fact that certain children of certain ages will never comply with social distancing. Little children, they won't. And also with class sizes, it's difficult to enforce social distancing. So the way around that is to have graduating classes come to school, and that makes sense to me. So, because they're at a particularly crucial part of their education. Not that there's any part of your education that is not crucial, but because they're graduating, they do need that revision. They need that one-on-one, face-to-face interaction. Even though we've been doing online schooling and what have you, there's nothing like the real thing, sitting with your teacher. So I think that's a really good
Well, the thing we can
measure.
add to that is that the Minister of State for Education has been the one trying to provide information about what the federal government is planning to do with the schools. And now we're told schools can reopen for graduating students. But I think that the Ministry of Education will need to collaborate with the Ministries of Education at the state level, and also perhaps with private school owners to make sure that the guidelines are properly spelled out. What should be the class size? What should be the protocol? Will students be required to wear masks compulsorily? What are the things that the schools should provide? The Minister of State had addressed this before, but he needs to communicate it more, and there must be buy-in.
All right, that's all we can take on headline news, and I can tell you for free that homeschooling is not really easy online. We've got Rotus, Michael, and Aaron to give us updates on Africa, global business updates, and COVID-19 update. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Rotus Odiri is now here to give us Africa business update. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Tundun. Good morning, Rufai.
Morning, Rotus.
Yes, so investing overseas. About 2-3 weeks ago, I had a conversation with some fintech CEOs and founders regarding using apps from Nigeria, wherever else you are in Africa, to be able to invest in US dollar, European, or Asian securities. It was a roundtable discussion that we had, a very informative discussion on the global business report. And for all our viewers, you can subscribe to the Arise News YouTube channel in order to check out informative videos like that. Now, the conversation came to mind based on the news that came out yesterday from Gilead Sciences regarding Remdesivir, which is their antiviral drug. I actually need to go back one slide to the summary for Remdesivir, because there's some crucial information actually before this one. But with regards to the Remdesivir drug, they provided information on what investors need to know with regards to pricing. So we should have a Remdesivir summary where we show exactly how much the drug is supposed to be priced at. There it is. So okay, I'm sorry. It's the previous slide. My directors are going to be screaming at me. It's the previous slide. So it's that, as far as the pricing is concerned, it's going to be priced at $390 for. There it is. Apologies to my directors. So Remdesivir, antiviral drug. The key thing here, it is not approved by the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration. This is the US equivalent of NAFDAC. What they gave them was an EUA, emergency utilization, right? Which was supposed to emergency utilization administration for emergency situations because of the number of people that were dying from COVID-19. They've priced it in an open letter to investors and the public at $319 per vial for developed nations. For private insurance companies, it's going to be at $520, and essentially the treatment that is administered is 6 vials over 5 days. So the estimated cost is anywhere from $2,340 to $3,120. Now, in Naira terms, you can pick your exchange rate, but if we use the investors and exporters I&E window at the settled rate of 388, you're looking at anywhere from 907,000 to 1.2 million for administration of the drug. Now, what does this mean for investors? This is the key question. Now we can go to the next slide now. With regards to whether or not you can consider investing in Gilead Sciences. Gilead Gilead Sciences is the biotech company, a research biotechnology company that produced Remdesivir, which initially was a malaria drug. Now, Michael Wilson, as well as Bode Oshoshimi, our RISE business analyst, both of them have talked about this company extensively on the Global Business Report. But for investors in Nigeria considering buying in, the stock closed at $74.56, which is about 28,000 naira at 388. Year to date, the stock is up by 14.5%. Now, Gilead, when you're considering buying stocks, you want to look at capital appreciation and the dividend yield. The dividend yield on this stock is average at 3.5%. If you add a 3.5% dividend yield to a 14% year-to-date appreciation, if this holds for the rest of 2020, you're looking at an almost 18% return in dollars. Key thing, though, is the analyst rating. 17 out of 30 analysts from FactSet. FactSet is a research company. 30 of those, out of 30 analysts that reviewed the stock, 17 said they should hold, 10 said you should buy, and 3 gave a sell rating. Now, the mixed reaction is because of this. There has to be caution when approaching these stocks. One, for biotechnology companies like Gilead Sciences, they spend a gargantuan amount of money on research and development. According to the open letter they wrote to investors, Remdesivir alone could top $1 billion in research and development costs. That affects the cash flow of a company like this. And if you're an investor that is looking to possibly buy into their stock, you have to be very cautious with the amount of money they spend on research and development because there are concerns over approval. As we said in the prior slide, this Remdesivir has not been approved by the FDA. So you can spend $1 billion on a drug, research and development, and you don't get approved. So you have to be very, very cautious with regards to investing in that. But finally, they're also producing drugs for antiviral drugs for HIV, lymphoma, and arthritis. So it's a company that if you have a long-term view, 3 to 5 years, that's where the stock closed yesterday at $74.56. That's where you want to have to have consideration when you actually look at a stock long-term for a 3 to 5 year horizon.
Okay, I mean, I'm really excited you put all those numbers out, and it's quite very true that research and development as regards pharmaceutical is on the increase. I mean, there are some drugs that they will spend over $1 billion for, and they don't still get to the market.
Right.
It's a game of give or take. But you see, the fear by a lot of... And Remdesivir was originally an antiviral, not a malarial drug.
Right.
Not a malarial drug from the start. I think that was just a slip. So, but the truth has to be said. A lot of people are very skeptical investing in the pharmaceutical company now because they don't want another Elizabeth Holmes case. If you remember that case, blood testing and the likes.
Right.
And the fact that if COVID clears by 2020 or first quarter 2021, the game is over for Remdesivir. And that's also, those numbers there will show you the capitalist outlook of the pharmaceutical sector.
Right.
Private sales, 390, to the insurance company, 520. That's why the insurance company now, that's why the healthcare system in America is worth over $3 trillion.
And very expensive.
So very expensive healthcare. This is the real politics and the commercialization of pharmaceuticals in the world. And I don't want to blame them that much. Because just putting $1 billion into something and almost not getting something through, what if the FDA doesn't even approve this in the end? Then it's a very cautious investment. When I pick stocks, I don't tell people to look at pharmaceuticals.
Rotus, I believe you have other stories.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So for Nigeria, the Corporate Affairs Commission put out a notice yesterday saying that if you're based on the Companies and Allied Matters Act, from now on, if you're, for incorporating your business, you no longer have to go to the FIRS in order to get a TIN, the tax identification number. So essentially, once you get your business incorporated with the CAC, Corporate Affairs Commission, you will get your TIN immediately. It's part of the ease of doing business, a drive to make things faster and more efficient with regards to incorporating your business. And then very finally, the Christies, the auction house in London, auctioned 2 artifacts that came from the southeastern parts of the country, two statues. Those artifacts, according to our National Museums Association, also the NCCM, they said that they were actually stolen during the Civil War back in back when that happened, and they shouldn't have auctioned them. But Christies said that it's illegal. Okay, well, here we go. So this is the Corporate Affairs Commission first, the notice that was put out, the public notice that was put out yesterday, stating that now you can save time with regards to incorporation. But then finally, to close, Christies and association have been, there it is. So the NCMM essentially saying that the National Commission for Museums and Monuments, that's it, National Commission for Museums and Monuments, accusing Christies of auctioning stolen, these things auctioned for $240,000, which is at an exchange rate of 388, that's almost 100 million, about 900 or so thousand. So essentially, this is Christies, this is the auction house. They've been going back and forth, but they sold them. It was sold in Paris yesterday. So it just gives one pause to think about where our tourism sector could be if we had all our artifacts intact and had more people, coming here to look at these items with regards to, what we can offer for Nigeria.
I think this is disgraceful, quite frankly.
It is.
And I recall about 10 years ago, a gentleman called Kayode Ogundamisi's forum stops the sale of an Idia mask from Sotheby's, I believe that was.
I remember.
And I wish that this was, recreated this time and repeated this time. I think it's shocking.
Tundun, Christies should give us the money.
Yeah, because it's ours.
It's our money. Christies should give us the money.
The story. Christies is saying that this particular sale is not in any way a violation of the Hague Convention of
I don't accept that.
1954 on cultural property, and that it has nothing to do with conflict. And that the gentleman, the art collector, who got this, who had it in his collection until his death in 2001, did not even travel to Nigeria during the Civil War to come and take any artifact from Nigeria. But the argument about the repatriation of cultural artifacts has a lot to do with identity, with imperialism, with colonialism, and it's an unending argument. But the question to ask is, instead of the Nigerian Museum saying we are saddened, are there steps that can be taken? Is it an issue that can be taken up in Parliament, if only to put it on record that we find it objectionable that cultural artifacts from Africa and elsewhere in the world are still in museums and libraries all over the world?
There is no
Even
argument.
if museums always make the argument against returnism.
There is no argument. It belongs to us. But thank you, Rotus.
Thank you so much.
Now for a global business update, we go to Michael Wilson in London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning. China's actually published some, whether you believe it or not, some good manufacturing data, which has helped lift the Asian markets. And actually, you should be paying a lot of attention to commodities as well, because eventually that'll be a big draw as far as if that's true about the Chinese economy. The stock market in Australia, obviously with very close links to China, up 1.5%. Hong Kong shares as well, despite the fact that the Chinese Parliament's passage of that security law has actually happened. Their stock's up 1.5%. So just to yesterday's business then, and there was a rebound in the United States despite that World Health Organization warning that you've just been talking about, that the epidemic is running out of control. Also, obviously, these concerns about a second wave in China and in South Korea. But that recovery in sentiment was also helped by something which is quite an interesting statistic out of the United States. It's called pending home sales, up 44.3%. So basically, in the United States, whatever you think is happening there, the fact of it is that people are deciding to move. They're very, very mobile about job hunting and things like that, which it doesn't happen, certainly not in this country, but it's good that it's good that they're there. I'm just wondering whether this is a sort of calculation that maybe the worst has passed. We keep looking for that, don't we, every day? And if this calculation is also appearing to be driving some appetite for risk, then that's actually quite good. And perhaps the reality is that the worst that can happen now is that there are going to be local lockdowns around the world rather than national ones. Here, the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is going to be making a speech. He'll outline a £5 billion accelerated infrastructure programme. This is very reminiscent of that New Deal I was talking about, and we've been talking about on the programme for a few weeks now, that echoes what happened in the United States, the Roosevelt New Deal after the Great Depression, spending money on infrastructure and so on. A lot of people would call it building bridges to nowhere, but the fact of the matter is, got a lot of people back into work. As far as commodities are concerned, oil now Oil rose about $1 a barrel yesterday after bullish data that I described to you from Asia, also from Europe. But investors are very worried about sharp spikes in new infections around the world. OPEC has cut its oil product output by 1.25 million barrels. That's according to an analytic firm here. And I have to say, I don't think it matters. As I said before, I think we're talking about overall demand rather than just OPEC, but you'll just have to bear with me on that, see if I'm right. I think I am, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so we are now at June the 30th, aren't we? So I thought what I'd do, as I promised yesterday, was give you a bit of a review and maybe a bit of a preview for about what's going to happen for the next 6 months of the year, because we are at the calendar date halfway through, and what a first 6 months it's been. So, as you know, world stocks have been on a sort of roller coaster, slumping 35% from February the 20th to March the 23rd, but they're now, get this, they're now within 10% of February's record highs, thanks to that huge fiscal stimulus that the governments around the world have actually put in. And believe this or not, the borrowing costs for high-end corporate debt are actually, in fact, fallen below January levels, given the amount of money around. So that's good. So what's going to happen for the rest of the year? Well, much depends, of course, on whether there'll be another coronavirus wave, which is further testing policymakers. And if an effective treatment, of course, for an effective vaccine treatment can be found, then all bets are off. And this could be one of the shortest-lived but deepest recessions that we've ever seen. So who knows? However, the crisis has increased the weakness of companies to high debt levels and so on, and their over-reliance on share buybacks, not on organic growth. An Asian market anxiety, I think, will probably continue, quite honestly, given the geopolitical tensions there. But right at the beginning of all this, if you believe the figures coming out of China, then the recovery in their manufacturing sector could be a big pull on commodities in the markets. So after a year of these violent and anti-government and anti-Beijing products in Hong Kong, the question there is how far-reaching that law is actually going to be, and investors will want to know whether anything applied by those laws will be applied to asset purchases that happened before, and so on. China and much of Asia will be publishing manufacturing surveys. There is always the question mark about North Korea. But so I'm suspecting that for the next 6 months of the year, coronavirus apart, it'll be these kind of geopolitical concerns that will keep things going. As far as the United States is concerned, it has delivered some very good news, actually. And as I said, it's been helping keep stock markets within 10%. It's unbelievable, isn't it? 10% of their pre-coronavirus levels. So the focus really is whether the rebound remains in force. Those job figures that we look at every month seem to reinforce that it's gradually getting better, although but that plunge was very, very low. So inflation, what are our expectations about that? That's again something to keep an eye on. We don't normally like inflation, but in these very, very strange circumstances, any kind of inflation seems to indicate that an economy is growing, and we'll hear more about that from the various Euro nations. So, and some investors are already into gold as well, which is an indicator that they're worried about safety. Well, aren't we all? None of us likes an enormous amount of risk. But provided inflation stays down, then there is no reason, I think, to believe that the ECB, for example, won't keep the stimulus going. So will the US juggernaut keep going? Well, I think it probably will. It depends, of course. We've got an election coming up in November, haven't we? Will Joe Biden be perhaps more friendly to geopolitical trade than President Trump has been, if he indeed were to win? Or will the Democrats actually clamp down on economic activity through higher taxes? Europe, well, the virus has been more or less reasonably controlled, and maybe we're going to turn the corner very quickly. Leading investment managers finally are actually saying Europe is a good bet for investment. I'm not quite sure about that, but we'll see. US firms, I think, are doing extremely well. Overall, then, it's all pretty difficult to predict. That's what they always say about the future, don't they? And I'm not sliding away from the prediction here, but I think provided that politicians can keep a balance between reviving economies and health concerns. I don't particularly like the fact that the world's economy is driven by epidemiologists. I'd much rather that economists and politicians were in charge. If that's going to be the case, then I'm relatively optimistic for the next 2 quarters. But of course, you can prove me wrong.
You're absolutely correct. Striking the balance, that's the main challenge for, political leaders all over the world. But quickly, before you go, I would like to ask you about the list that has now been published by the EU, about the countries that can travel in and out of the EU. How does that affect the United Kingdom, considering the fact that there is still a lot of negotiations going on with regard to whether persons from the UK can travel in and out of other European countries?
Yeah. That's a very good question. What I think about it is this: that there'll be a lot of political pressure to open up those tourism channels, because a lot of the countries in Europe, particularly in the south of Europe, and not uncoincidentally, those economies that aren't doing very well depend for a great deal on tourist trade. What they have to do is to convince with an extreme amount of honesty as to whether or not they have this pandemic under control. If they do, and indeed, there may be people saying we don't want people from the United Kingdom because, as you know, we've had a spike in various parts of the country again. I think that's what we're going to have to get used to. I think there will be a gradual easing of these restrictions as far as travel is concerned. But remember this big thing we were talking about yesterday is an interesting corporate one. Boeing, the MAX 777, the MAX 737, by the having some kind of testing done on it now, because there's going to be no room, I suspect, for big aircraft anymore. So I think that travel will decrease, but I think those things are gradually opening up, and I hope they do. I, of course, will be staying here, enjoying the sunshine in the UK.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Now we move on to Aaron Akerejada for an update on the COVID-19 pandemic. Good morning, Aaron.
Yeah, good morning, Tundun. Looking fierce this morning in your mountain lion skin.
Nice. Thank you.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Rufai.
Aaron, fierce.
Yes, fierce, I would say.
Sasha, fierce.
Okay, yes, fierce again. All right, getting straight into the mix as it stands right now. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, talking about the head of the WHO, spoke yesterday in their normal briefing, and he has said that it's been 6 months since the World Health Organization got wind of COVID-19, and as it stands, the verdict at this moment is quite grave, understanding that several people have been speaking and they've been kind of optimistic about the virus probably abating, or probably the spike is actually flattened, or the curve has been flattened. He says no. As a matter of fact, he says it is not time to take your foot off the gas. It is, as a matter of fact, the worst is still to be expected down the line in the coming months, because you can actually see the figures right there. At the moment, we have well over 10 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 around the world, and well over 500,000 global deaths from COVID-19 around the world. And you look at this and you say to yourself, although quite 48% of those who have actually contracted COVID-19 or the coronavirus have actually recovered, but nevertheless, it's still very damning, and we're beginning to see spikes in different places. It has taken a turn for the, it has taken a turn more than we can ever expect. We've seen things actually coming. We've spoken, I'll be hearing in this morning talking about drugs, Remdesivir, dexamethasone, the hydroxychloroquine. We've seen drugs coming and go out. We've also seen vaccines being touted. Of course, AstraZeneca have been pushing alongside the Oxford University. Sanofi in France have also been trying to push for a vaccine. But as we still speak, we're yet to get a definite timeline to when we can actually have a workable vaccine that people can use to prevent COVID-19 from actually spreading, or probably nip it in the bud. We look at how things are playing out in Africa. We can actually see that the numbers are actually well over 300,000. As a matter of fact, the experts are saying that before Friday, this number might have risen to as much as 400,000 in Africa. It might be the lowest amongst continents when you put it side by side, but nevertheless, it is still rising, and it is rising sharply. Dr. Ghebreyesus has spoken about, and he says everyone still needs to be cautious about this. Everyone still needs to be on top of the game, and he has warned world leaders, because We've seen world leaders bring in their personal preference into the handling of COVID-19, and brings you to a particular point. We've talked about what is the mess of a leadership that has happened in Brazil, even in New Zealand at a certain time where we're hailing them for superior leadership and being proactive. We've seen them also drop the ball. Now, we cannot say that at a certain time they were claiming that they were COVID-19 free, but that cannot be said as we speak right now. And they are still having more and more cases as the days go by. Although it might be in trickles, but there are still cases prevalent there right now. You look at all this and brings us to the US, which is being the most hit in the entire world. Well over 2 million cases, getting almost to 3 million cases of COVID-19 in the US across several states. And of course, California right now being one of the hotbeds of COVID-19 in that particular place. New York, it was dipping at a certain time, is beginning to rise again. And Governor Cuomo has actually thrown a challenge to President Donald Trump, who everyone knows has refused to wear a face mask in public. He says it makes him look funny, and he will refuse to do that. Although he claims when he went for a tour at a factory in Detroit, Michigan, that he wore a face mask outside the cameras, and when he came in front of the cameras, he had to remove the face mask. But at the moment, Governor Cuomo is saying, with what is really happening right now, it is high time we need to enforce and put an executive order that anyone who goes out must put on a face mask. But that might not happen because the acceptance speech for the Republican convention that will be happening in some days' time, a lot of people are beginning to are keeping an eyeball to that to see maybe, just maybe, President Trump might lead by example. Things are beginning to go our way in the U.S. Of course, Vice President Mike Pence just yesterday actually spoke to the youths and insisted, because he too followed his leader by going to different places without wearing a face mask. Right now, he is actually backpedaled, and he has now said people should wear a face mask as much as possible, especially in places where you cannot where it's not possible to socially distance. You need to wear a face mask. And right now, it's been back and forth. And in my opinion, if you'd ask me, this shouldn't be a bone of contention. With what is happening in the US, with the spikes we're beginning to see in several key areas, talking about wearing face covering of any kind should be mandatory. We've also spoken about that in Nigeria, for example, whereby it should be made mandatory that people who should go out should wear face masks, because some people think the worst is behind us. But right now, with the new curveballs the COVID-19 virus is throwing to us every single day, it's a must at this very junction.
Well, a quick comment on President Trump. In fact, the governor of New York challenged him to put a mask on it. And by putting a mask on it, he challenged him to come up with an executive order to make the wearing of masks compulsory. Yeah. Because in New York, they've seen that it is something that works. Now, in Jacksonville, Florida, yes, the wearing of masks has also been made compulsory. And President Trump is going to give the Republican National Convention acceptance speech in August in that same community. And now, but he is saying it will not make him look presidential. And he doesn't want to give photographers the pleasure of taking his pictures with a face mask. So really the bottom line is a point that we have made here, on many occasions about leadership by example, whether with regard to our own leaders in Nigeria or with regard to leaders elsewhere. Yeah. I think that President Trump is sending the very wrong signal because Mike Pence, the vice president, although he reversed himself, was saying, look, this is about personal choice. This is about freedom of speech. I don't see how the wearing of a mask is about the freedom of speech. But what do you think of the latest development in Nigeria? The reopening of schools and, the extension of the second phase by 4 weeks?
If you'd ask me that, I think it's a little bit too early. I think it's a little bit premature. The same sentiments I have right now were the sentiments that were shared by South Africans when President Cyril Ramaphosa some weeks ago said it was safe to go back to school. And we've reported there time and time again how things have actually just taken a turn for the worse in South Africa because schools were opened, whereby pupils, teachers had gone down with coronavirus. At the moment, since we're not getting the hang of it, the presidential task force have really said that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone.